I hope you are ready for the class. So we are actually discussing various aspects of Edward W. Said's introduction to Orientalism. Now, yesterday I told you something about the exteriority of Orientalism as a concept, how Orientalism was conceived of, premised upon exteriority. Orientalism was premised upon exteriority of the Orient, the East, because there was an us-them binary. The West thought of the Orient as something different and something inferior. Inferior to and different from the West, that is the Occident. And because it was the Occident who was perceiving, categorizing, and controlling the East, because they had the power to represent, they actually tried to perpetuate this difference and this unequal power relationship between the East and the West in such a way as to favor themselves. So this is something that Said has pointed out. Now the next topic that we can discuss now is the illustration and elucidation of another quotation. Now Bikram, read out that quotation that contains this bifurcation of the East and the West in terms of us and them. The quotation actually ends with them. Yes. Read out the whole quotation.
Orientalism was ultimately a political vision between the familiar and the strange. So familiar er passe in the bracket, first bracket, Europe, the West, and us, and beside the strange there is in first bracket the Orient, the East, and them.
Just think about it. This is what I had started discussing. And let me go on a bit. See, what I was trying to point out was that there was a political vision. This political vision was the Western vision. Why was it a Western vision? It was a Western vision because, you know, the West harbored this vision. They promoted this vision. They entertained this vision. Now, when we entertain a vision, for example, APJ Abdul Kalam, our former president, had entertained a vision of India as a superpower by 2020, as a world power. So when we actually create a vision, when we harbor a vision, we actually try to do it from the perspective of our self-interest, community interest, regional interest, or for that matter, even national interest. Are you getting my point? So when I have a vision, when I create a vision, and when I perpetuate a vision, go on having the same vision for any number of years, there must be some planning, there must be some deliberation at the back of my mind or our minds. Are you getting my point? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The West had this vision. The West actually conceived of, categorized and controlled the Orient, represented the Orient, manufactured the Orient as different from it, as well as at one and the same time as inferior to it. Now, this was a political vision, as Said has pointed out. Now, politics is all about power. So, this political vision was conceived of on the basis of particular interest. Particular interest of the West. So, I have already discussed how Orientalism was premised upon what is called exteriority. So, obviously, Orientalism was being mooted by the West from afar as outsiders. They were not Orientals. They were not Orientals. They were categorizing the Orient from far off, from a distance. This distance was not only physical distance, but also an ideological distance. So for the Europeans, you can very easily understand, because they were operating under the influence of what can be called Eurocentrism. They were considering themselves as familiar, and the Orient and the Orientals as strange. So obviously there was this creation of the binary. The binary between civilized and savage, between us and them, between the Orient and the Occident and the Orient, between upright and depraved, between austere and resplendent, and so on and so forth. Now, when we are talking within a classroom, our surroundings are familiar to one another. I know you, you know me, and so on and so forth. But when somebody else comes in, say Benjamin Coleman, Professor Benjamin Coleman comes in, or for that matter, say someone like say Debra Ann Castillo talks to us. She pronounces English in a different way. She has her own ways of looking at it, at academics, as logistics, because it is different from ours. It is different from ours. So there is this strangeness, this idea of strangeness. Now, whatever is unknown is strange. When it is known, when it becomes known, it doesn't remain strange anymore. Are you getting my point? So the East was strange. The Orient was strange. The Asians were strange. The Africans were strange. From the perspective of whom? From the perspective of the West and the Westerners. So this political vision was associated with, number one, a possible encounter between the East and the West. Number two, settlement of the East by the Westerners. Number three, in many cases, even governance, rule over the East by the West. So there was at the back of the Westerners who had this vision of Orientalism to control, to command the Orient and the Orientals. Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Class A. So you have to understand this, that here also the question of exteriority operates full blast. Absolutely. Okay. Let me go to the next topic to discuss. Yes, what are the other things that are left? Well, we have discussed two topics till now.
The first one is historically and culturally, there is a quantitative as well as a qualitative difference. Ellipsis point, Atlantic power.
No, ellipsis
Quotation.
points. Why haven't you completed the whole quotation?
Yes, sir.
Have you found it out?
Yes, sir.
So read it. I was really flabbergasted when you sent me this quotation in this truncated form. I told you to fill out this particular quotation and then send me. Okay, read it. Read the full sentence and I will explain. Now, this is actually associated with the difference in the way that the Orient is viewed and conceived of by other powers, other European powers and other Atlantic powers like the United States.
Okay,
as
sir.
compared to France and Britain. Yes, go on.
Historically and culturally, there is a quantitative as well as a qualitative difference between the Franco-British involvement in the Orient and until the period of American ascendancy after World War II, the involvement of every other European and Atlantic power.
Wait a minute. Now, this is something that I have already discussed, my dear. You have to understand that, who had the most encounters with the Orient? who had the most active interests in the Orient? Obviously the French and the British, because they had dominated large portions of the Orient. Yes or no? Yes or no? Say, if you think about it, say from the 18th century onwards, say after Enlightenment, the post-Enlightenment era of colonialism and imperialism meant that, hello, আমি পাঠিয়ে দিয়েছি it's not that the other powers did not possess certain lands, certain regions, certain say even countries. Okay, people like Spain, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Danes, and so on and so forth. They also had their holdings, their colonies. But compared to the string of colonies that led to the creation of the British Empire, and even the string of colonies under France. Now, the other powers had no comparable interest or stakes in the Orient. Yes, after the Second World War, the situation changed. Why and how? Because, America started flexing her muscles. In Korea, in Indochina, that is in Vietnam, in Japan and other places, and even in the Gulf countries and all that. America, the United States, tried to increase their power and prestige, but in a different way. Yes, military means was resorted to, but there was another thing. Economic, financial imperialism. It is called a kind of a neo-imperialist stance that the United States had towards the East. So obviously, the difference is both qualitative and quantitative. The Franco-British involvement in the Orient was so very different and more substantial than those of the other powers, that Orientalism as a political vision, Orientalism as an academic stance, Orientalism as a psychological attitude, these were different in the case of the major powers like France and Britain as compared to that of any other power. Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
What about the others? Only Bikram Chaudhary does not make the whole class. So I am asking the others. You can write it in the chat box if you have any problems. And Bikram and Shamim and others can read it out to me. Are you getting my point? See, if you don't understand, you can tell me, because I have already told you that this is a difficult text. So if there is any lacuna in your understanding, you have to get it clarified. Okay. Any question? If there are no other questions, I will go to the next topic of discussion. What is the what are the other topics of? Okay, one thing I have to think about. There is a differentiation between of different kinds of knowledge. What are these two types of knowledge called by side?
Pure knowledge and political knowledge.
Yes, pure knowledge and political knowledge. Now here, Edward Said is hazarding a very, very gross generalization. And critics have tried to find faults with Said for that. Feminist critics, Marxist critics, new historicists, post-colonial critics often try to point out that any knowledge is political. Because knowledge gives power. And power is the main thing in politics. In the inter-individual, inter-communal, international relationships. But what Said is trying to do is to use this generalization in order to make sense of a very, very significant aspect of our epistemological drive. Now, you have to understand that there are branches of study that are oriented more towards direct power game. They are called political knowledge. For example, military studies or defense studies, political science, economics. Okay. These are seriously political in nature, directly political. Compared to it, say, a study of Leo Tolstoy's social vision is comparatively less political. Are you getting my point? Because when we are discussing Orientalism, the context is that. So while discussing Orientalism, we can safely say that there are certain topics, there are certain subjects that are more political than others. Now here you have to understand that Said is not impervious to the fact that even the social vision of Leo Tolstoy could be discussed from a political angle. Hello. ক্লাসে আছি তো। So man has to understand this. We have to understand this, that pure knowledge and political knowledge are different, not in kind, but in degree. And in many cases, the difference is so marked that we cannot ignore them. Because, when we are talking about Orientalism, entire departments were there. Orientalism was first practiced as an academic endeavor from the perspective of Oriental studies. Study of dead languages, study of Eastern languages, their customs and all that. But then the Europeans found out very, very fast that there were serious political dimensions to various disciplines. For example, think about the energy reserves of the Soviet Union. When Said was writing this book, Soviet Union was very much there because Said was writing it in 1978. Today, had Said written this today, he would have talked much more about the United States and China and not Soviet Union. So this is something that we have to understand. Okay. So I have discussed a few topics today. Tomorrow I will start my class at 8. Please try to make that sacrifice because, I have an official meeting tomorrow and I will be busy afterwards. And if you have any questions to ask, you may ask me now.
Sir, the political knowledge
Just wait.
is
Hello. Just wait. Because there are official calls. Okay, ask me.
sir, the political knowledge. Can we say that is it also the outcome of the colonial discourses that are indoctrinated into us?
No. Actually, please try to understand. Political knowledge is a category of knowledge that Said has pointed out while discussing Orientalism. Because much of knowledge had to be politicized. Because Orientalism was a political vision based on inequity and unequal power dynamics. So obviously, what happened in the Orient was very much of interest to the Occidentals. Understood? Because in many cases, they used this knowledge in order to increase their power, their control over the Orient. Are you getting my point? When you will read, say, Chino Achebe's Things Fall Apart, you will be able to make sense of this. How the district commissioner was writing a treatise on the pacification of the savage tribes in the lower Niger Delta. And how such efforts were considered to be expedient for the colonizers. Hello? Have you understood?
Yes.
Any other question? Okay. If there are no other questions, I could have discussed the other topic today itself, but I think for you, listening to 2 or 3 topics being discussed in one class will be a bit heavy. So I'm refraining from discussing the 5th topic today. I'll do it later on, say tomorrow. Okay? And after that, I will introduce Homike Bhaba of mimicry and man. Okay? Now you do one thing, from any standard book, you look up the word mimicry. You look up the word mimicry so that you can very easily understand what I am going to talk about. Okay, Shamim?
Yes, sir.
You may remove me from the meeting, please.
Okay, sir. Thank you.